You were the initiator of the European Association of Archaeology and its first president. Can you tell us more about the foundation and the aims of the EAA? And how you got the idea and why you do this? And
well, the idea was first, one I already had in the 80s or mid-80s, that I was sitting discussing with who became editor, Chippendale, who then became editor of Antiquity. And I said, and we were discussing, he wanted to expand Antiquity to become more international or global. And I said to him, why isn't there a European Journal of Archaeology? All journals in Europe are national. We should create one. And then he said, yeah, but wait, Kristian, first I need to expand Antiquity. And there was world archaeology, but there was no European journal. Everything was national. So what I did was I said, okay, let's create a European journal. That's how it started. And then in '88, while I was at the center, I had time. I had 2 years off to write and to think and to do some of the ideas I had not had time to do. And one of them was to create a European journal. So I invited some people like Jan Hodder and Chippendale and a few others. And it should be called Journal of European Archaeology.
How you do the founding?
Yeah, we started with that. Michael Rowland was on board. And then we went to some publishers, and they all turned us down. Yeah, believe it or not. But they were not really interested in a European Journal of Archaeology. But then one of the publishers said to us, yeah, but it would be much easier if you had, because many journals have a society, an archaeological society, to support them. Yeah. If you had something to support you. We said, this was just after the fall of the Berlin of the wall, and Europe would start to come back together. So we suddenly realized, wow! We said, now is the time. Not only a journal, but also an association. Now, for the first time, we can bring people together. We couldn't do that before. So it was a combination of the historical events and then this idea that we need to create something European, starting with a journal, but then we realized, now, we can think big now. Something like the Society of American Archaeology, we can do it for Europe now.
And how quick it happened, how...
Oh, it took several years. It took several years, I can tell you. When I stopped as president in
1994.
98, I stopped as president in 98.
98, okay.
I realized, and I looked through my files, and I could see, I started working on that in 88. It had taken 10 years, and it had taken 6 years before we had the association. It was a long start-up, you see, because I said to myself, or we agreed in the group, we need to expand the group, we need to create an association for everyone. Not only like the USPP or others, they're only for university academics. We want to create one that includes all archaeological activities, heritage management, museums, universities. And we want also to open it up for young archaeologists, And so we created a big group, a founding group, and in that we also had actually a graduate student, or a PhD student, which was Arek Marciniak, by the way. And then we had people from Eastern Europe, from Russia, from many countries in Europe. And the reason we could do this also was because I had that position where I could also spend some money from the agency, so I could finance, some travels and some expenses for people from Eastern Europe because they couldn't finance to participate. And Alain Schnapp in Paris, he provided facilities where we could meet, and he could pay for some dinners and so on. So, you know, and I had the support also of the heritage, you know, the Riksantikvar, you know, the similar agencies in Sweden and Norway. Margrethe Bjørnstad was in Sweden, and there was also Øyvind Lunde would become the new Riksantikvar in Norway, and they were good friends, and they would support. So Øyvind Lunde, when we began to be formed and should have the first meeting, he said, okay, I can take the secretariat and pay that, because you cannot start something like that without, there has to be someone to pay the expenses until you start getting income. And when you start, there's no income. So in a way, because I was in that position, I could put in money and support. From Norway and Sweden, they could put money in support. Alain Schnapp could put money in support in Paris. You could not create something like the EAA without somebody supporting. And also in England, there was Jeff Wainwright from English Heritage. He was also very supportive and supported in many ways. So we had the support of these heritage, archaeological heritage, national heritage institutions at the time. They were quite modern at that time, because during my time in the heritage, it became more and more, young archaeologists could see heritage is an interesting place, you know. Mike Parker Pearson in England went into heritage. Many very good researchers went in there. So suddenly, you know, there was a new dynamic.
And after 30 years, how do you see the result after 30 years of the EAA?
Oh, it's incredible. I mean, we have just had Belfast. And I mean, Belfast is not so easy to get to. There were 3,000 participants. It's amazing. You know, my slogan as first president was 1,000 members by year 2000. And we started in 94, right? 93, 94. And we more or less made it. But then for a long period it stood still, because my generation, there were many who didn't think they needed EAA. Yeah, but we have our own national societies and we have our own specialist meetings. Why do we need the EAA, they said. But what I could see now, the reason we are expanding now, and now we soon have 4,000 members, we are growing, you know, become very big. The younger generation, they can see it, they see it as a place, a useful place to go, and a meeting place, and also where they can get support for a lot of things. So, you know, it's a new, younger generation who has embraced the EAA, and that, you know, makes me very happy.
And this is an unbelievable success of your work, yes?
It is, but we have had some very good presidents, I have to say. Well, each of them had made their contribution.
Another question. You have a really multifaceted, highly successful career from your point of view as an archaeologist and a university teacher. What would be your advice to students following a career in archaeology today?
Well, my advice would be, point one, never put all your eggs in one basket. Always be open to the unexpected, because my so-called career was totally unexpected, totally unpredictable. And when there came this opportunity to do something I had never planned to do, I took the chance. And I learned a lot about how to organize things while I was there that I could use when I came back to university. How to organize projects and things like that. So that would be my first advice. Be open to the unexpected. And even if you think you are at heart a researcher, you can still practice research at a museum. You don't need to be in a university. And also I would say archaeology now today has so many aspects that can fulfill many talents. You can become an archaeoscientist. You can become a museum. You can go into communicating with the public, which is an incredibly important part of it. You can go into managed collections. You can do excavations. There are so many. You can sit in a local administration. There are so many aspects of archaeology today. You can do garden archaeology. You can do historic archaeology. You can do the Paleolithic. There's no other discipline in university who offers you such a broad spectrum.
And you can always do something new.
You can always do something
new. You
new.
gain new data.
Yeah, because poor medieval historians, they have the documents they have, and they will never get more. Whenever we need more information, we go out and dig it up.
One of your focuses on science in archaeology. You have written extensively about this, and we will discuss this aspect detailed later. Traditional archaeology monographs on material culture are still written and an important basis of your discipline, but they seem to lose out on work that is highly influenced by the natural sciences. What does it mean in your eyes for our discipline? Do young researchers in the humanities have to be half natural scientists to pursue a career in archaeology?
Well, again, it's one type of career. And it's a very interesting one. I've changed my career several times. The last 12 years, I've been mostly working with geneticists and strontium people, science people. And I believe archaeology, from the very birth of archaeology, was based on being interdisciplinary. And sometimes we nearly forget it, then it comes back. We have had these three science revolutions, as I call them, and we are now in the...
Explain us this, explain please the colleagues, the three scientific revolutions, the students which hear us. Which three revolutions?
The first revolution, of course, is Darwin and archaeology, because the principles of evolution of starving between 1850 and 60 happened at the same time as also you created modern geology, you created archaeology, but you created it through collaboration, because archaeologists applied, excavation from geology or learned from geologists about stratigraphy. And they could show that in geological layers, the geology could say, but these are old, and the archaeologists could say, yeah, here we have human and animal bones. There were people living here. And these people like Warsaw in Denmark, Mortier in France, Darwin and so on, and Stenstrup in Denmark, working with Warsaw on the kitchen middens, they corresponded. They traveled and visited each other. They knew they were into something very big and new. They knew it was a revolution. And these disciplines were created within 10 years, or became the modern disciplines we know today within 10 years. And from that time on, you could forget about the Bible and 3,200 as the formation of the earth.
So I think it was April 3004.
Okay, maybe.
Bishop Usher
Yeah.
told us this story,
So, already at that time, it was a revolution in the worldview of people. It was a modern period that started there, really. The second revolution, of course, was C14. Suddenly you could date everything, absolutely. And it came hand in hand with the pollen-botanical revolution as well. So environmental archaeology came into play. And it also changed the whole discipline, because we had been all wrong about the datings of the Neolithic, of course.
I remember when I started to study, our teachers told us the Neolithicum, the linear pottery time starts around 4,500.
Yeah. Because it was all projections, it was guesswork. How long time does it take for culture to develop, or period, And basically, projections were wrong. And suddenly, you know, the good thing about this revolution is that suddenly you can you transform relative knowledge into absolute knowledge. Suddenly there are things you know, and you don't need to spend a lot of work on demonstrating it. So what does it do? It frees a lot of intellectual energy. Suddenly you can use your brain, your intellect, to do much more interesting things like making chronology. You can ask interesting questions about economy or social organization, and that would lead to new archaeology and so on and so forth. And now we are in the third, between 2010, 12, and now, the past 10 years, that's the third revolution. It has completely, again, we have absolute knowledge, that with new types of knowledge we never had before. It's a dream. It's a dream. And we can now demonstrate migrations. We can now demonstrate genetic heritage, genetic admixture. We can demonstrate pathogens. We can demonstrate that the plague killed half the Neolithic populations of Europe. Demography and so on and so forth. And of course, it's an earthquake in archaeology. So you have to adjust. But again, it frees new intellectual energy. Now you can ask new and more interesting questions. So probably this is the most exciting time to be an archaeologist since C14.
Absolutely. And now we have the time of the low-hanging fruits, you know, what we see in the last 20 years, that every result of the DNA colleagues we do together with them is a new result. Yeah. And we published it in Nature Science.
And we have never had so much funding. There are archaeologists who complain and think, yeah, but all the funding goes to DNA or in science. Yeah, but this is funding you would never have had. This is new funding.
Absolutely.
This is new funding. We have expanding the funding enormously. Suddenly we are where we publish regular in Science and Cell and Nature. When did they ever happen before? When we put out a press release from one of our papers, within 3 or 4 days, it's global in all big media, from BBC to New York Times to Die Zeit to all over the world.
Absolutely. So let's switch from the career aspect to science. You have worked in a lot of fields. Many will know you for your work on Marxist theory in archaeology, Bronze Age warrior ideology, prehistoric interconnections, and lately ADNA studies in archaeology. What determined you to focus on these research topics? What in coincidence, or did you have an overarching research agenda in mind?
Well, you know, often it's things just happen in a certain way. Of course, the fact that I chose the Bronze Age, that I remember, was because I felt that was understudied. There was a lot of people who doing the Neolithic, it was very popular, and at that time, Iron Age studies were very popular. You know, you had all these big cemeteries from the Iron Age and Römischer import and so on and so forth. And you had all the wonderful pottery from the Neolithic and so on, and new excavations. But no one really studied the Bronze Age. So I said, okay, but then I take the Bronze Age. And so that was maybe a practical thing, but also then I realized the bronzes are really interesting. So it became sort of, it became my field. But you know, I think it was good. I did this very, very solid study of all the objects, and I have made drawings of them all, and I have studied the useware and everything. And in a way, it gave me a foundation that I could always bring with me. So when I applied theories, I had, you know, a good knowledge of the material.
Do you think that it is important that you have a good knowledge of the material when you do theory? Because after you had often the feeling, especially in the British archaeology, that the theories in the middle and the finds are neglected.
Yeah, I think increasingly now the young generation we see now, they are much better at combining it, because we have a new, you can say we have a new return to studying both science and the material, I think, in many ways, and that's because of science. Now you can do so many things now. You can do lead isotope analysis of the copper and see where it came from. You know, you can do lipid analysis of pottery and see what food and they were eating or what they were drinking. So this science revolution is much more than DNA, and it's been taken on board of the younger generation. The younger generation is used to be digital. They're used to work with big data. It's nothing strange for them. So I think, in a way, we are in a good position now. There was a period, yes, maybe sometimes, you know, the pendulum goes like this. But also, I want to add, archaeology is now such a big discipline. We can afford to have people who mostly do theory development and think about theory. Of course, you need to apply it. Yes, that's true, and that's the most difficult part. It was only when I turned 30, I really was able to integrate it. Even in my PhD, I was not fully able to integrate theory and the empirical, I mean the finds. Yes, I could make interpretations of hoards and how were they buried and where and things like that. Yes, and Quellenkritik, source criticism, I could make things like that. But it takes time also. You know, it's a process to learning more and more. But I still think we are now a huge, broad discipline. We need people who can do theory. We need people who can do digital. We need people who can do, you know. So I have had the privilege of working in many different fields, and I can say that that has, you know, that has allowed me to get a broader perspective. I worked with pollen botanists from I was very young. I always found the environmental side very, very important. And it was a pollen diagram that made it clear to me that you had a migration of the single-grave culture, Cordova single-grave culture in Jutland, because I could just study the pollen diagrams. And I could see there was something massive happening, you know, a massive change that could never have been carried out, you know, unless there was a migration. So I think the best of archaeology is interdisciplinary, but that doesn't mean that every one of us need to be interdisciplinary. There's also room for specializations. You know, it's a little like in medicine. There are professors for every piece of the body or every thing here, right? And in a way, we also have specialists in everything more or less. But the best archaeology is when we sit around the table and discuss and plan a project and plan a research question together. So, you know, in that sense, I think in a way we are also now in one of the most interesting phases, because we work together now. There was a time maybe archaeologists were afraid that the geneticists had taken the front seat, you know, and were driving the car, and archaeologists were in the back seat. But I think we are now in a really, it's a lot more balanced. Geneticists have realized they need the archaeology.
So for the data, you need the story, you need the archaeology. Without archaeology, it's only a data. So therefore, I never understood the problem. I'm always, when I was young and I studied, you know, my professor said, go to the Hilfswissenschaften. to the helping sciences,
Yeah.
but what he means is radiocarbon and dendrological things, you know. But all this is science, and we all are on the same heath, you know.
And you know, geneticists also have their own interpretations of their data that can be quite complex, as we have. And we need to understand also the way geneticists think, and geneticists need to understand the way we think. And that takes time. I have been working now with geneticist Eske Villerslev and the whole team there since 2011. And we are an integrated team, but it takes time.
I know it. We started with Kurt Alt and Haag and Johannes also at the same time, maybe a little bit earlier. And you must be open and discuss. And we are happy that Leipzig and the institute is now nearby, so we can reach it in 20 minutes.
And I was happy to realize that in Copenhagen there was suddenly this new team with Eske that had been part of the breakthrough of next generation sequencing.
Absolutely.
And then I invited Eske for lunch to ask if he would join my ERC application. And likewise, so I'm on his and he's on mine. And it's a really partnership.
You mentioned the single grave migration. I remember 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago, a lot of the archaeologists denied migrations.
Oh yes.
And of course migration was the idea of the Stuart Pickett, Child, Renfrew, you know, it seemed to be an old theory, and now we know that migration happened. It's a single grave migration.
Oh yes.
Linear pottery. Do you expect this?
Somehow,
from an archaeological point of view.
I always was convinced, and I wrote a paper about prehistoric migrations like 30 years ago, where I went through all the evidence. And because I used environmental and evidence and pollen diagrams, and also you could show that the pottery technology was totally different from the TRB culture, and everything was different. I have always been convinced that it was a major migration when you listed all the evidence. I considered the anti-migration discourse in archaeology to be motivated by the burden of history. I mean, about it was ideology. On the one hand, it had been overdone and used for political purposes before the Second World War. So there was this need to take away the big theories and migration because they have been misused. But then also there was this new archaeology who focused on social organization, economy, and that was easier to study in a smaller region. So you lost interest in the bigger picture. And then you just said, yeah, but there were no migrations, because then you didn't. This was a way to justify that you only looked at the local or the regional level. Then you could justify it and say, yeah, but migrations is something that's tainted. It was a mistake of the past. It was never really justified. It was rather there came some new methods. You could study economy, you could study and used ethnographic models, you know, called Renfrew and chiefdoms and all these kind of things, linear bandkeramik communities. And with all the new rescue excavations, suddenly you had all the settlements. And suddenly there was a whole new field, you know, you needed to understand how was a household organized, how was a community organized. And so there were many good reasons, I think, if you look at the history of archaeology and the history of methodology, the history of excavation, it's easy to understand why the focus was on the local.
Absolutely. And I think with the DNA and the migrations, we have nearly no problem when we be in the Neolithic or in the Bronze Age or in the Iron Age. Now we do the DNA and the analysis of the last 2,000 years, and when we go in the first millennium, suddenly we have tribes, Celts and Germanic tribes and Slavs and so on, they are named in historical sources. And in the last 20 years, we was all very skeptical about tribes, and we are searching for other words, groups or whatever, Suddenly it seemed to be, by the first results, that in the area where, for example, Caesar mentioned Celts, or in the area, for example, where Tacitus mentioned Germanic tribes or Slavic tribes and so on, we have really a different DNA, and we see movements. And I think it would be a big challenge, not for the geneticists, but for us as archaeologists, to explain this without this old, how should I say, you mentioned it, this horrible concepts before the Second World War, this Nazi connotation, to do it in a new way. How you see the interpretation of the first millennium?
I think this is also a really interesting time for the Iron Age research, for, as you say, bringing together historical sources, genetics and archaeology, because it will allow us to revitalize and maybe also redefine some very important concepts. We have totally neglected the concept of ethnicity. We know from social anthropology all societies in the world have ethnic labels they use. You can have many, and we know from historical sources, classical sources, that ethnicity was incredibly important, but it could have many layers. You could have ethnic groups that were, like in Greece for the city-state, you could have an ethnic label for all Greeks. So there were many layers. But in archaeology, because of the burden of history, as it were, we have not theorized it. We have not done our homework. We have not done our comparative studies. That's one problem. The other problem is that in history also there was a long, for three generations, they also had a skeptical period of extreme source criticism, where nearly everything was useless of historical source because it was constructed. It was not real. They never understood that there also a reason why, if they were constructed, why would you then construct it? That is the interesting question they never answered. So historians deconstructed many of our historical sources and tried to say you cannot rely on them. The fantastic thing now is that archaeology has proven beyond doubt in many cases that the ancient historical sources are correct. There are, of course, things that are not correct, but there are many things that are correct. The way the Phoenicians, that we have stories about the Phoenicians in the historical sources making colonies in South Spain and beyond Gibraltar. Yes, it has been proven. The fact that we have about what Herodotus wrote about the Scythian tribes, now we can show, he was basically right about their burial rituals, about many things. And also what they wrote about the origin myth, these origin myths, where did the Langobards come from, where did the Goths come from, and so on, where to go. And now we can show, basically, and the archaeology was able to show that they brought with them the material culture. And now the genetics show, Johannes Kraus and his team has this wonderful migration project where they combine all the sources. My wife, Lotte Heder, has done a big study about Iron Age myth materiality.
We are part of this project, and a lot of material come from Halle.
Yeah, and where she could show also that the old sources, there's always a core of truth there. So again, it's an exciting period. We have to re-theorize and redefine, in new, more complex ways, ethnicity and myth of origin. And what purpose? Why did the Langobards actually maintain their myth of origin? And why did they carry certain symbols with them? And the same with the Goths. Whereas there are others like the Franks, they have no myth of origin. They come out of nowhere. So it's again an exciting new interdisciplinary field that revitalizes all three disciplines.
Yes, I discussed it often also with Johannes Krause, because, for example, we have the Langobards here. We have body burials, but the problem is at the origin of the Langobards at the lower Elbe in the surrounding of Hamburg, we have only burnt graves. So in the moment, it's difficult to find samples, with the exception of the princely tombs, but the princely tombs are very bad preserved, so that it is difficult in a moment. But we will excavate it. We will go on.
Yeah, but we can still show also. We have also been looking into some Langobards, and they have clearly. I mean, we have skeletons from the Iron Age of Scandinavia, and we can clearly say at least they are Scandinavians in one way or the other.
Yes, you see that.
We can see that, and so with the Goths. Some Goths, even in Spain, so much later, when there is a cemetery we have analyzed. Some, yes, some have been mixed up with local, but some are still pure Nordic, genetically. It's amazing.
So this is really a big advantage, and we will see what happened in the next years.
Oh yes, it's really exciting.
Especially in this site, because, for example, in Spain, at Roberto Rich sites, they are working on this Muslim conquest and this Visigoths and also the Spanish local people, and they are all together in one grave field. But probably let us start with the basics. Who has the control over the means of production is, of course, basic in any society. But what does a Marxist or neo-Marxist approach to archaeology have to offer compared to other approaches?
Well, I think what it has to offer is an understanding of power and how you are able to control production or other people and labor or trade. That is a Marxist perspective. And the Marxist perspective is also characterized by that it wants to understand more objectively the real historic forces, what happened beyond the knowledge and the horizon of the prehistoric peoples. We want to extract from that knowledge of what the forces of history are, and how are you able to maybe develop a more ranked or unequal society. As it was formulated, I think by Timothy Earle in one of his books about how chiefs come to power, how is it possible then a minority of people get control over a majority of people? That's one of the really big questions. And that Marxist archaeology offers the best theoretical framework for asking the right questions, I think, there. Then you have other theoretical approaches that's been very popular in the recent decade or so, that more goes and say, yeah, but we need this more post-humanistic thing, or we need to understand how people were thinking in the past. That's a completely different approach, but it's also valuable. You need to understand, how did people perceive of the world, the cosmology, or themselves, or how did they perceive animals and nature? So you try to put yourself into, in a way, the head of prehistoric people and to understand it from their perspective. And I think both perspectives offer something important. The last one perspective was you would call hermeneutics earlier on, that you try really to understand it the way they saw it. But real history, if you want to understand the forces of history, you have to go above that level, and you have to analyze and understand the real objective forces of history. And these forces were mostly beyond the knowledge of the people of the past. This is what that's where we can begin to learn from the past, because there are regularities there. So I think we need both perspectives.
Should we have learned from the past if we, for example, looked on peace and war? Could we have learned something from the past?
Now the problem is that we are not very good at learning from the past. We can tell stories.
It's strange. Why?
Yeah, politicians are human, and they're politicians, not archaeologists. Or they're not historians. So they make all the mistakes again and again. No, I'm maybe joking a little bit, but you know from yourself, when you were young and your parents wanted to tell you something, from their experience, you didn't really listen. You had to experience it yourself the hard way. So we learn also from our own history and hopefully become wiser. And in a way, it's the same thing with history. Yes, you can learn from history. There are things and processes that are the same, more or less. History does not repeat itself but there are forces of history that repeat themselves. And now we have this recent book by Graeber and Wengrow, where they want to turn the whole thing around and say, yes, but we have not looked enough at those forces of history that maintains equality. Because they say there are also forces of history and there are societies that remain more equal. And they are understudied. And we should also show that there are forces that try to maintain equality and resist inequality.
Yes, we do a congress about inequality and equality, and what we find out really that there are a lot of societies who had the aim of equality.
Yeah.
And not inequality. For example, here in the middle of Germany, in the time, we have such an unbelievable inequality in early Bronze Age, and from Middle Bronze Age on up to Iron Age, for nearly 1,000 years, we have big and successful societies, and what we see is more equality than inequality.
Yeah, but they're still ranked.
Yes.
They're still ranked. So the question is, there are degrees of inequality, there are degrees of equality. The Greek said, we have introduced democracy, but for whom? Only for the free citizens, not for the slaves. So, we are all equal, but some are more equal than others. I don't think a purely equal society ever existed.
I believe, but before the Neolithic. Maybe in Mesolithic. And then the people are...
But again, there you also have complex hunter-gatherers in many places.
Late in Mesolithic,
yeah.
But I think maybe not in Paleolithic.
Maybe not. The really interesting question is, you have periods throughout later prehistory, both in the Bronze Age and in Neolithic, where it looks like you have more peaceful periods. Trade, for instance, when you get into the Bronze Age, trade becomes incredibly important to distribute metal. Trade demands peace. So you need warriors to protect the trade caravans. Warriors, of course, cannot always be controlled. So you have periods like 1500 to 1300 with tumulus cultures and everything is flowering. It looks relatively peaceful, and then suddenly it all collapses and there's a lot of warfare. So why can't people maintain peace once they get it? For some reason, it never happens. It never lasts. It never lasts.
You are right. It's a miracle, you know. For example, when you look at the Onetids culture, for 600 years we have peace, and we have a big society, you know, but which controlled a big area in Central Europe. But suddenly it broke down.
Maybe there was a revolution. Maybe there were groups that were not so happy.
It could be. Yeah. Why not?
That would be a Marxist perspective.
I believe that along the river Oder is one group, and the one group led the people and the material going through from Hungary to the north. This is the beginning of the Nordic Bronze Age.
Yeah.
And I wrote it 15 years ago, and it seemed to be. And Van Kilde followed me, so I think it could be, but we will see. You worked a lot with Professor Timothy Earle.
Yeah.
How came this about, and in what way did his approach influence your work?
Well, I mean, it came about in 1983, I think, where he invited me to a session he had in Vancouver. The AAA meeting on, something about political economies. He had been told by Anthony Gilman that there was this Kristiansen there in Denmark who did something interesting. Try to read that. And then he thought it looked interesting. He invited me. And from that on, you know, we have been collaborating. Like I have been collaborating with Mike Rowlands also for more than 40 years. His influence has been that he has always a focus on the basic questions of power and how you achieve power over other people. That's his main interest. And therefore he wrote that book, How Chiefs Come to Power. And he's always able to come in and say, yes, but how do we explain this? In this way or in that way. He's very good at formulating sharp questions. So that's always an inspiration. And then I invited him to join a project in Thy in northwestern Jutland around 1989-90, where we started a big field project and also excavations, because that's the richest area in the Bronze Age in Denmark, with more barrows than anywhere else, with more rich burials, with more metal. And we also did pollen analysis there, and we did all kinds of things there. And he brought with him very stringent field methodologies, you know, how to do systematic field work. And brought his students with him, like John Steinberg and others. And I brought the pollen botanist along, like Sven Torkel Andersen, and then we had Jens Henrik Beck there, an old friend of mine, who was the museum inspector there. So we had a really, really strong team there, and then a team from UCL with Mike Rowlands, and also with one of his PhD students came along and joined us. So for 7 years we worked there, and it was only in 2018 we were able to publish the 2 volumes from the project. It took 20 years to finalize it because there were so many analyses we wanted to do, and we had all other projects, but finally they came out. So you know, I think much good research. If you meet an interesting person that you think can inspire you, and vice versa, then it often develops into a friendship because you share certain basic perspectives. And when you combine friendship and good research, that's a really, really wonderful combination.
Absolutely.
So I have many of these old friendships that started as an inspiration.
It's the same because you go with your ideas in the same direction, in the perfect way. You are a little bit different, so that you can show two poles.
Exactly. There has to be a common ground, but then also a difference so you can challenge.
Yes, absolutely.